Thank you all very much. I want to speak briefly about why we should be doing this. I take it that most of you here would regard that as blindingly obvious, but I think it's worth underlining why it's important that we take on the challenge of stopping deforestation. And secondly, say something about the how. Now, there are many dimensions and perspectives on the how, and other people will be covering other parts of that story. But I'm going to approach it as an economist. That's my trade, but this is, of course, a subject which involves just about everything. You know, the science and the biology and the physics and the chemistry and so on. It involves the politics and the governance and so many other dimensions. But I'm going to focus mostly on the economics. Now, so let's start with the why. Well, the first part of the story is if we're looking at stopping or reducing the risks from climate change, then one of the lowest costs ways of doing that is to stop deforestation. We don't yet know exactly how much it will cost per unit of CO2. Our own estimates, the kind of numbers that we used in the Stern Review about 3 years ago, I still think are probably in the right kind of ballpark, that you could halve deforestation for around $15 billion per annum. We won't really know that until we really get going. There's no excuse not to get going. We should think in terms of numbers of that kind, and we'll find out a great deal along the way. One clear lesson when you start to think about how to bring the cost down is that we have to act across the world at the same time. Because when people differ in their estimates on the costs of stopping deforestation, one of the key issues on which they differ is the amount of dislocation or leakage, or however you phrase it, that if you try to stop deforestation in place A and half of it moves to place B, then you're obviously going to get a double the cost estimate relative if you assume that none of it shifts from A to B. So one of the key aspects of any kind of understanding of cost is this problem of leakage or shifting, and that surely should tell us that this is a subject or a set of actions where we have to be acting across the world at the same time, not only because of the magnitude of the problem, but also because of the problems of leakage and keeping the cost down. So that's, roughly speaking, what I wanted to say about the cost. At maybe $5 or $10 a tonne of avoided CO2, it has to be cheap at the price, and who knows, it could be a lot cheaper than that if we act in concert in the way that I described. Now, the second part of the economics of why is because of all the benefits that arise which are beyond the fundamental issue of reducing the risks of climate change. Like many of you here, I've worked most of my professional life on the economics of development and the battle against poverty. That's been 40 years of my professional life. And if you look at the economics of development, you see so many benefits from stopping deforestation. Just to think of the floods in Bihar and northeastern India over the last 2 or 3 years. One way or another, those have been in large measure. Different aspects have kicked in at different times, but one way or another, those have been in large measure associated with deforestation and soil erosion in Nepal. These floods set back development by 20 years. They have a huge effect on development, and that's just in one part of the world. There are many other examples. If the Amazon started to collapse, much of Sao Paulo, as it were, the driving force, the heartland of Brazilian growth, would turn into a desert. These are the kinds of effects on rainfall and on patterns of water and flooding that deforestation has, beyond simply, of course, the association with climate change. There's so many more things that most of you here would be able to rehearse. They're the incomes of people who depend on the forests for a living. There's the whole story of biodiversity, which my friend Pavan Sukhdev and his colleagues have focused on so clearly and strongly recently. So, first and foremost, there's an overwhelming climate change argument in terms of the low costs of battling climate change associated with deforestation. But there's still more, these much stronger and also fundamental arguments concerned with development.